Hello, everyone. This is Professor DePaulo. Welcoming you back to Psych 65 Research in Psychology. And today we're going to be talking about the methods section. So, I previously mentioned the introduction and all the background information that you had to research through either Google Scholar or through PsycInfo, Psych articles, to set the stage to justify why we're conducting the study. And the study we're conducting, as you hopefully know by now, is we're looking into COVID vaccination and COVID health behaviors. So it was important and still is important to a degree to try to find out why certain people follow the guidelines, the health guidelines like vaccination and social distancing and mask wearing, and other people just don't. And it's not simply just a political affiliation leading to this change, because there's people in both parties that will, both major political parties, that will either engage or not engage in this health related behavior. And sort of, if people aren't engaging in this health related guidelines, how do we get people to actually follow the guidelines? Because the guidelines are helpful, whether or not you believe in the efficacy of vaccination or mask wearing. There are studies showing that it is effective. And with the COVID pandemic lasting all of 2 years by now, we need to know, how do we get people on board? So if there's a future pandemic or a future problem, how do we not repeat the disastrous process that happened towards the beginning of this pandemic, in the beginning of 2020, the early days of 2020, where everybody was just like, we don't know what to do. Let's shut down our society and, have everybody wear masks and go from there. And that wasn't very effective. So maybe if we can get people to follow the health guidelines, we don't have to do a total shutdown of our society in the future. So that was kind of the justification for the study. And the study has been going on for a couple of years now throughout the different variants, with the original variant and the Delta variant and the Omicron variant. And I don't know what's next. I don't know if there's anything next. Obviously, COVID will become endemic, which is basically, it's going to be like a flu. It's going to be annually, yearly, and we probably will have to get some kind of vaccine similar to how we vaccinate the flu, although COVID, which was much more serious than the flu. There's some evidence to suggest that Omicron was less severe, less virulent, even though it was more contagious. And we don't know where we're going to go in the future. So are we going to have like Omicron version 2 in the fall? We're going to have something. And so this is not sort of to argue the point, do we need to go on with society? Obviously, we have to go on with society. We have to go on with life. We have to start going back to normal, some version of the new normal. And hopefully that version of the new normal will be similar to how we deal with the flu. And if COVID is nothing more than the flu, then we just we get vaccinated. Some people don't get vaccinated, and we accept the risks. But we're not sure where this is going. So although COVID is getting better by now, we don't know if there'll be a return. There's going to be some version of COVID around in the future, but hopefully not a pandemic strength version where we have to basically go through all of this again. So that's the justification for the study. And I think it's very important to know these things. How do we stop something like this happening in the future? And how do we kind of take the politics out of it? Because the politics are toxic. And get on with, if there's an emergency in the future, are we going to wear masks? What kind of masks are we going to wear? What's the most effective kind of mask? Are we socially distancing? How do we get people to follow the rules? How do we get people to vaccinate, etc.? And personally, I'm not one that's, going to go like on a soapbox about vaccination and mask wearing and all those things, because I understand people, it takes away people's individual freedoms, And then we have to weigh what's good for society versus what's good for individuals. And I'm not going to sort of go there. I'm trying to explain the justification for why I think it's important to know these things so that we can most effectively tackle any kind of future problem we have. So that's a kind of a long way around of why I'm doing this study, because some of you may be saying, well, COVID is done. COVID is over. Why are we studying COVID? Why are we thinking about COVID? I'm tired of COVID. It's been 2 years, and I'm going back to my normal life, and I don't care about COVID anymore. Well, okay, COVID might be over for now, but something's going to happen in the future, and we have to do a better job dealing with it, and that's what the study is kind of about. So all that being said, let's talk about the method. So the introduction I mentioned previously, that's going to be a pretty long, in-depth review of the previous literature, justifying why the study is important, and kind of all the things I just said. Those are all reasons to study this particular subject, right? And looking at connections between empathy and looking at connections between, social distancing, mask wearing, empathy, political affiliation, all that stuff that I gave in the introduction. For the method, it's very simple. This is a really, really simple part of the paper. It should take you basically 10 minutes to write. So the method, you're going to write the word method centered at the top of the page, so that's your major heading, method. 12-point font, Times New Roman. That's the standard font, Times New Roman. You could use Arial also if you want to use Arial, but I prefer Times New Roman, and I prefer putting like the figures and the tables in Arial, just so they're a little bit different in the manuscript. So this is what I prefer. You don't have to use Times New Roman, but it's a pretty standard one to use. You don't want to use anything crazy. You want it to look very plain, right? So method is written as the word method with a capital M. Center it in the top of your paper, the top of a new page. So make sure you start a new page for this. Do not put this on the same page as the introduction. Start a new page. Method in the middle, center, 12-point font. And then you're going to have 3 subheadings: participants, materials, and procedure. So participants should be in italics. Same size, 12-point font, same thing as method, right? But it's going to be in italics. It's also going to be left justified, as you see on the screen. So you're going to write the word participants. You're not going to put a colon. You're not going to put any, hyphens or anything. Just write the word participants in italics. And then on the line below, you're going to write 1 or 2 sentences describing the total number of participants, the numbers of males, females, non-binary people involved, and where they were recruited from. So in our current study, we had 25 total participants, which is a small sample size. We're going to talk about that later. But there's 25 total participants. 19 were female, identified as female, 6 identified as male, and 0 identified as non-binary. So 19 females, 6 males, 0 non-binary, and they were recruited from an undergraduate research methods class at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. And that's all you have to say. Now, if we collected other important demographic information like age, like if we're looking at age, I would mention the age breakdowns here. I give age ranges. If I was interested in studying, ethnicity or race, I could put the breakdown of that here also. But based on our sample, we have a pretty young sample, right? Predominantly people in their 20s for the most part. And the sample is mostly Hispanic with a little bit of other races sprinkled in there, but mostly Hispanic Latino. So we're not really looking at a breakdown in terms of race and age, so I haven't included it here. If we were going to analyze race and age, then I would want to mention the breakdowns of race and age in the participants section here. But since we're not doing that, all you will have to do is talk about 25 participants, 16 female, I'm sorry, 19 female, 6 male, 09 binary, and how they came from our undergraduate research methods class at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. That's it. Very simple. So I want to keep this section very simple, 5 to 10 minutes, and you're done with it. Uh, Save it as a PDF, and then you can upload it, and it should be an easy 10 out of 10. Unfortunately, some people don't follow directions, and they have to make some changes, but if you do what I'm telling you to do, this is not an issue. The second subsection would be materials, so you want to write that in italics. And then on the line below, you want 1 to 2 sentences describing the materials used in the study. And this is going to be basically an online survey and what variables you measured. Right, so an online survey that measured empathy, it measured mask wearing, it measured vaccination status, it measured social distancing, right? So those are some of the major variables. So you want to talk about that it's an online survey and all the different variables we used in the study. And you can find some of that stuff in the introduction as well. So in your hypotheses, you were hypothesizing about the relationship between certain variables that we measured. And you just want to list out those variables. So remember, write these as sentences. Don't list them, don't put bullet points. Write them out as in full sentences. So the material section should be basically 1 or 2 sentences describing the online survey and what the variables it measured. And that's all. So very simple. This is a very simple study because it's just a survey. So there's not much to talk about here. Now, if I were submitting this for publication, I could talk about all the variables and the scales that I'm using. And I could describe the scales in detail and talk about the scales' reliability and validity and provide that information. So if I were submitting this for a publication, that's what I would do. I would make this a lot longer. But really, for our purposes of the class, that's not that relevant because I'm not asking you to talk about what particular scales you used. For example, I used the Toronto empathy scale, and I think it's a 20-item scale if I remember off the top of my head. And I have the validity and reliability of that scale, but what's the point? For a classroom exercise, that's not necessary. These scales are reliable and valid. Reliable means they're consistent, so that basically they're measuring things in the same way over time. That's reliability, consistency. Validity is, do the scales measure what they intend to measure, what they say they measure? And for the most part, the scales that we're using in the survey are already established. So they're both reliable and valid, and they measure what they say they're measuring, and they're consistent over time and across participants, across situations. So this is not an issue. These scales have all been used many times. Now, there are some questions that I wrote when I designed the survey at the end, asking about social distancing and whatnot. Those individual questions have not been studied in terms of reliability and validity. So if I were to publish the survey, I would want to then run some numbers, analyze that data and look at the questions that I wrote and look in terms of their reliability and validity. And I could do that a variety of ways. The easiest way to look at reliability would be Cronbach's alpha, which we're going to talk about in the future. And the easiest way to do validity, I guess, would be running correlations with similar measures. But there's a wide variety to calculate validity. You can do predictive validity, you can do convergent validity, you can do divergent validity. There's so many different ways to do this. I'm not asking you to do that. But that's what would happen if I were to try to publish this. I would need to make this a little bit more beefed up. with some stuff on reliability and validity. But for the purposes of our study and for this class, I want to keep it as simple as possible and not bog you down with just numbers and, technicalities. So that's all for materials, basically survey and then talk about some of the variables being measured in our study. And then for procedure, you're going to write down in italics what happened during the study. So another 1 or 2 sentences talking about what happened. So basically, the online survey was completed. An online survey was taken. It took approximately, 30 minutes to complete. Something along those lines. And that's it. So because it's a survey, so there's not much going on in the study. We didn't do anything. All we did was had you complete a survey. So there's really not much to talk about. So you have 1 or 2 sentences for the participants, 1 or 2 sentences for the materials, and 1 or 2 sentences for the procedure, and you're done. Save it as a PDF, and then upload it, and I will look through it. And this should be an easy 10 out of 10 for the rough draft. It's really hard to screw this up, unless you don't format it correctly. In which case, I will let you know that you want to obviously change that for the final paper. But this is a very easy assignment. Should not take you more than 10 minutes. And it's so much easier than introduction. Introduction is hard. It's hard to write the introduction. It's challenging. It's something you haven't done before. It requires a lot of research, requires organization, requires good writing. That I expect to be something that needs to be worked on. And I will give you lots of feedback on that. But the method is kind of just my way of giving you free points. And so take your free points and move on to other important things. Because you're going to have a lot more work to do when you do the discussion. So the discussion is complicated. It takes more effort to write. And then obviously the abstract, the title page, and the references are also more work. But the major parts of the paper that you'll be writing are the introduction and the discussion. The method, very easy. The references and stuff, that could be formatted online, so you don't even have to format that yourself. The abstract's a little tricky to write, but the title page and the references are pretty easy to do. And that's your whole paper. So this is a really easy part of the paper. Take your 10 minutes, complete it, upload it as a PDF. I will get back to you with feedback if I need to. Hopefully it's perfectly fine and there's nothing I really have to tell you. Just kind of take that and put it into the final paper. So like I said before, I expect a lot more difficulties with the introduction than I do with, say, the method. However, if you have any questions about this, please let me know. I'll be happy to talk to you through email or if you need to schedule office hours or whatnot. But I think it's a pretty basic thing, basic assignment to do. So that's it for the method section. Like I said, if you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I will see you back online.